Well, it's me, Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training with Elevenses again. It's show number 277. It's Sunday the 9th of October and I'm having yet another crack at getting the show together. I've had a couple of goes at presenting it live this morning, but for some reason it was all stuttering and not running smoothly at all. So what I'm doing is I'm actually producing a recording, so I'm live, but we will see it as a recording later today. So what have I got for you in the show today? Well, we're going to have a quick look at a track day death at Oulton Park, which was down to circuit safety failings. OPEC have cut production of crude oil, and that has stoked a fear of fuel price rises again. India's Hero Motor Corp have invested $60 million in California's Zero motorcycles, whilst an energy company in India has actually taken a 100% stake in an e-bike manufacturer called Revolt, which we'll also have a look at. We'll also take a glimpse at some e-bikes that we're still waiting for, but one you can buy, at least if you're in California, is CSC's smart-looking RX-1E, which I think probably represents the immediate future of electric motorcycles, that kind of bike anyway. And then we'll have today's discussion point, which is all about Finland and their road safety record, and an interesting article that was sent to me, which claims that it's their record is amazing. We'll actually contrast it with the UK's and see that it's not actually so wonderful. And the interesting point in that article was about the Finnish forensic approach to road traffic collision analysis, and that's something I do want to focus on. So I would say settle yourselves down for the next 30 minutes or so, but obviously you're doing whatever you're doing at the moment while I record the show to make up for the failed live transmission earlier. Right, so anyway, first thing I just want to point out is that hopefully this event will go out live without any problems at all. It's the online talk series October show. It's Science of Being Seen in Depth. It's all about understanding visibility, conspicuity and camouflage. Some useful terms there, but I will try to explain how they interact with each other, what they mean. So that's Wednesday 12th of October. That's going out at 8 p.m. It's been delayed a week because I was suffering from COVID last week and wasn't feeling too wonderful, but the good news is I'm pretty much back to normal now. So that's Wednesday next week. Do join me if you possibly can. And okay, into the news. Well, Motorsport Vision Limited, MSV, as they're probably better known, have been fined £158,000 and ordered to pay court costs of £250,000. And that follows a fatal accident on an Oulton Park track day back in 2013. Now, MSV actually pleaded guilty to a single count of acting contrary to Regulation 3 (1) (b) of the Management of the Health and Safety at Work Regulations 1999. Now, what actually happened was that the case was brought after a track day rider, a chap called Michael Carson, sadly died at a crash at Hilltop at the circuit. 4 other riders were injured, 2 seriously with life-changing injuries. Now, during the investigation, CCTV footage came to light of a very similar incident earlier in the same year. And it was concluded that the 2 separate accidents could and should have been preventable. Now, in the second instance, Stephen Horton's motorcycle was struck behind, which caused him to fall into the track, putting him at risk of being hit by following riders. Now, on this occasion, he wasn't struck, but investigators found that it should have highlighted the risks created by lack of marshals at that particular location. And the prosecution's case was that whilst CCTV cameras and a system of safety lights were in place on the circuit, neither of those systems were actually adequate to manage the risks at Hilltop itself. The CCTV system actually had a blind spot, and the warning lights that there were actually placed too far in advance of the location so that riders could have passed them before the red lights actually came on for the incident further ahead on the track. Now, they argued that if a marshal had been stationed at that post, they could have instantly warned of a downed rider by waving a yellow flag to alert anybody else approaching. Now, MSV accepted they failed to act suitably and sufficiently, and they failed to assess the risks to riders at that section of the circuit. And apparently it followed a removal of a marshal who had been there. Now, after the fatal crash, MSV reinstated that marshal's post at Hilltop. They added extra safety lights, and they also installed 2 new CCTV cameras. Other improvements were also taken at other locations around the circuit. MSV said, "We are constantly reviewing our operational and safety procedures and ensure that these evolve in line with advances in technology. Similarly, we seek to learn from any instance that inevitably do take place on circuit to determine if changes are required. It is a matter of deep regret that on this occasion in May 2013 that opportunity was missed. We've learned from this and continue to strive to offer the safest possible venues for the enjoyment of all motorsport activities." So sad loss of life on a track day there, somebody going out to enjoy themselves on a circuit and finding that the circuit was not in fact as safe as everybody hopes. It just seemed an astonishingly long time for that investigation to actually take place, sort of 9 years after the incident. Right, okay. So, in world stories, gas and petrol prices have fallen back from their summer high, but fuel prices are under threat once again, since the OPEC oil cartel and its allies agreed to a bigger than expected cut in oil production on Wednesday. Now, the decision was actually led by Saudi Arabia and Russia, and they agreed to reduce output by 2 million barrels a day, despite pressure from the US to maintain supplies, which would avoid increasing fuel prices and adding basically to the soaring inflation and increasing the risks of a global recession at a time when the economy is dealing with the continued impact of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Now, in response to the cut, the price of Brent crude immediately went up 2%. Doesn't sound much, but it rose to 93.8 US dollars. That's the highest price it's been since mid-September. US President Joe Biden said that he found the action unnecessary and announced that the US would release 10 million barrels from their Strategic Petroleum Reserve to the market. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve is actually the world's largest emergency supply of crude oil, but the US reserve is already at the lowest level since 1984. Since March, the Energy Department has actually released 160 million barrels of crude oil, or over 1/4 of the stockpile. Now, critics say that the move to release the crude to help control prices isn't actually a good idea, and that by using up their reserve, the US could be putting themselves at even bigger risk from further production cuts by OPEC. So, if you're wondering about the price of gas, maybe you're wondering about the price of electricity too, but there is movement afoot in the electric motorcycle industry, particularly in India. And I've got a couple of stories here to illustrate that. Now, the first is that Hero MotoCorp, which is the world's biggest motorcycle manufacturer in terms of sales, has hit the news several times over the last few days. Now, firstly, earlier this month, Hero partnered with the state-run Hindustan Petroleum Corp to set up EV charging infrastructure across the country, across India. Now, secondly, 2 weeks ago, and this story actually has only just unfolded on my newsfeed, I'm not quite sure why, Hero MotoCorp announced an investment of $60 million in California-based Zero motorcycles. Now, the plan is to jointly develop electric motorcycles, so the release said, with Hero's press release describing Zero as a global leader in electric powertrains. Now, it remains to be seen how Hero and Zero will link resources, but in electric bike terms, Zero is a mature company. They have an existing lineup of bikes. They're on sale in a number of countries. Zero officially launched as far back as 2007 as a rebrand of a startup called Electricross, which was actually producing an electric off-road motorcycle, and they actually launched their first bike, which was the world's first electric street motorcycle, the Zero S, as far back as 2009. So Zero have some pedigree. So it's possible, of course, that once facilities are in place, the deal offers Hero a straight to market range of e-bikes. They can presumably build them in India. Zero presumably will benefit from the cash injection to boost their R&D, but I did wonder whether they might actually switch production to India, which presumably would make their bikes cheaper, because if there's one problem with the Zeros at the moment, it's that they do fetch quite a premium price in the showroom. Now, the third story involving Hero is that they also pumped more than $56 million into another electric vehicle company. This one is called Ather Energy, and they are said to be the top maker of electric scooters in India by revenue. And the first electric product resulting from the Ather Energy link up was actually launched on Friday, October the 7th, under the Hero's emerging mobility brand Vida, as the Vida Plus electric scooter. Now, the prices will start at just $1,800, or at least the Indian equivalent thereof, which is more expensive than many of the alternative sort of electric scooters on the market in India. But it could be because Hero are determined to improve build quality. Now, there have apparently been a spate of electric scooters catching fire in India recently, which has raised concerns over safety. So that was obviously threatening consumer confidence in electric vehicles, but Chairman Pawan Munjal told reporters at the launch event in Jaipur that while it may have been our wish to launch this product earlier than we had to get it absolutely right for the greater good of everyone. Now, the scooter won't go far. Minimum range, it says, of 90 miles on a single charge. It probably won't go very quickly. Hero has, of course, also partnered with Taiwan's Gogoro. This is something else I've reported on over the months about the battery sharing infrastructure. Though it's not clear whether this particular scooter does use that battery swap technology. Now, Hero are taking bookings for this bike as of October 10th, that's tomorrow. Deliveries are due to begin in December. So, like some other legacy automakers in India, Hero have been rather behind the curve in launching electric two-wheelers, which have mainly been produced by startups like Ather and Ola. But these maneuvers are making it very clear indeed that Hero are seeking to rapidly expand their presence in the two-wheeled EV market in India, at least. Now, if it's no big surprise for existing powered two-wheeler manufacturers to be looking to add electric vehicles to their model range, another kind of announcement on Friday showcased a different kind of acquisition. In this case, the company involved is called Ratan India, and they are purchasing 100% stake in the electric motorcycle maker Revolt. Now, Revolt were the highest selling electric motorcycle in India, and bike owners have apparently clocked up 100 million kilometers plus on their bikes on Indian roads so far. And they have a manufacturing facility in northern India and 29 dealerships right across the country. Now, Ratan India actually already owned a 33.84% stake in Revolt. But what caught my idea is that Ratan India are not an automotive company. They're actually involved in the energy sector. They have power stations and they supply electricity to the Maharashtra state. Now, so if that sounds a bit like an unlikely matchup, the stock market obviously didn't think so, because their SORs were up 10% in morning trading after the announcement. So someone certainly likes the deal. Now, okay, these aren't the only examples of a shift in emphasis in India either. Startups Euler Motors and Yulu received investments, both of them worth several $1 million in recent weeks, and local automotive giants Mahindra and Tata Motors have also ramped up their EV efforts. Now, Tata have just launched the car, the lowest price electric car available in India, at just over $10,000 US. So that's for a four-door hatchback. That is astonishingly cheap. It doesn't have a huge battery, so it doesn't have a huge range. It doesn't have a lot of the sort of bells and whistles that we come to be expected in the West, but it does look like quite a smart little car, and it's remarkably cheap. Obviously, a lot of motorcycles cost a darn sight more than that. So as a nation, India is the world's largest market for powered two-wheelers and has the ambitious goal of actually switching to e-scooters and e-bikes. And what they want is the electric vehicles to make up 80% of the total two-wheeler sales by 2030. Now, that's a pretty ambitious goal because right now the figure stands at around 2%. So it's a big ask, but clearly local manufacturers are moving rapidly in that direction, not least, I suspect, because it would give them a foot in the world market. And frankly, I have to say the recent protestations from MAG and the National Motorcyclist Council here in the UK that says that our infrastructure, our country isn't ready for an alternative energy future is beginning to sound more and more like a denial of the new reality. You can debate that, and I'll be interested on your views to see what you have to say about that. Now, as I normally say, don't forget, if you do have comments, questions, I will try to respond to them, obviously, after the show. Set yourself a reminder. The show normally goes out live when it's glitch-free at 11 on Wednesdays and Sundays. Today, you are watching a recording, unfortunately, due to the fact that I couldn't get a stable connection with my streaming software. So I've had to pre-record it, and I will upload it in a minute when I've finished. Now, back to e-bikes. Now, one of the reasons that riders here are still treating e-bikes with some skepticism, I think, is the apparent lack of progress on some high-profile projects. Now, we have, a market here for large capacity, powerful performance, high-speed motorcycles, and that has somewhat flavored the way that electric motorcycles have been sort of viewed here in the UK. Take the ARC, for example. It's a UK-based company, the ARC Vector. It was revealed by founder and current CEO Mark Truman at the 2018 Milan show, where it was billed as a bike with 125 mile per hour top speed, a 270 mile range, capable of recharging in 40 minutes and weighing in at just 220 kilos or 485 pounds with a 16.8 kilowatt hour battery. Many people, myself included, simply didn't think those numbers actually added up. Now, in terms of design, the bike was, right at the cutting edge. It basically features a monocoque carbon fiber body, so no specific frame, hub center steering, and carbon wheels. Now, on top of that, the rider would get a full heads-up display with a specially made helmet, which talked basically to the motorcycle, and even the riding kit would have haptic feedback built into it. So all this came at a price, £90,000 for the base model, £110,000 for the uprated one with the heads-up display, helmet, and so on and so forth. Now, a year later, with nothing yet built, the company went into administration in 2019 because it lost some key investors. Now, Truman bought the assets and relaunched the company. So where did we go from there? Well, back in January, we were told that the bike was ready to be shipped to customers. Now, that date slipped, but at least by midsummer, the prototype was seen undergoing test on track with James Ellison, the former MotoGP rider, on board. So there was some progress towards actually getting a bike out there. Now, the latest news is that the bike's, the pre-production model has actually been doing the rounds of the press. There's reports I happened to notice on Motorcycle News. The one I read was actually in Cycle World online, but the bike is still said to be a pre-production model. So what about the performance specs? Well, top speed is limited to 120, 125 miles per hour, depending on which report you read, the weight has actually grown by 20 kilos to 240 kilos, 529 pounds, which is pretty heavy by sports bike standards. And the real world range has fallen to 200 miles at urban speeds and more realistic 120 miles on the open road. That's the estimates, though. I don't see the bike having been put through any of the standard test cycles yet. So where are we now? Well, orders being taken, but the first few customer bikes, when they do arrive with customers, will still be rolling test beds. They'll be working on the software, for example, on the bikes, and also ironing out any issues with the high-tech clothing and helmets. Now, that's UK's ARC. What about over the big pond? Well, Canada's Damon motorcycles have proudly announced just this week that they have a $90 million order book for their rather more conventional looking pair of bikes, a sports bike and a naked, conventional sort of forks, swing arm frame, and the motor and battery hung from it, more like a conventional petrol engine bike. Now, this particular company also claimed some fairly outrageous specs. They said 200 plus horsepower, 200 mile per hour top speed, plus 200 mile plus range. But when the November 2020 announcement of their Hypersport SX and Hypersport SE was made, the specs had taken a bit of a tumble. Now, configured with a 15 kilowatt hour battery, the Hypersport SX was claimed to have a more than 150 mile per range and 150 horsepower, which still sounds very unlikely. And the Hypersport SE with 11 kilowatt hour battery was said to be capable of over 100 miles range and 108 horsepower. So again, I would still say that those specs sound rather dubious. But as yet, of course, neither bike has actually been seen in the flesh. Now, in June this year, Damon was reported to be building a factory in British Columbia, as well as a production facility in San Rafael, Canada, with a view to bringing in mass production in 2023. Well, plenty of people have been putting money down in advance of these motorcycles being seen. And last month, actually in August, so it was 2 months ago now, the company spokesman announced that media and public test rides will be later this year. Well, they haven't got much of it left, and all through next year, starting in Canada and the US, and then Europe, including France, afterwards. And she said, I wish I can give you a specific date, but I can assure you we are working on it. So, okay, if those are still not quite vaporware exactly, but they are certainly not ready for customer use just yet, either of those bikes, by the sound of things. Over in the US, a California-based motorcycle dealer, CSC Motorcycles, has just unveiled a nice-looking little bike that you can actually buy and ride right now, or at least you will be able to in just a couple of months' time. It's due to arrive early next year, and this is the motorcycle. There it is. It's the CSC RX-1E. Now, it's going to be a modestly powered machine, and as I said, I suspect this is the immediate future of electric motorcycles. Something here with a top speed of around 80 miles per hour. So roughly equivalent to a more conventional 250 or 300cc ICE engined bike. The motor is rated for 8 watts continuous, but an 18 kilowatt peak, which is 24 horsepower. But as usual with an electric bike, it's the torque figure that is monster. It's 61.2 pounds-feet or 83 newton meters. And the result is that even though the top speed is relatively modest and the power output seems relatively modest, it will perform in a much more sprightly way than the horsepower figures suggest. So it should make it ideal for the urban commuter, and it would have the capability to cope with faster roads just about. So put that in perspective with a sort of a bike you're probably more aware of, the CBR 300, for example. That produces around 30 horsepower from its single cylinder motor, but just 20 pounds-feet of torque, or 27 newton meters. So it's 1/3 of the RX-1E's figure. Now, the battery on this bike won't encourage long cross-country trips, though, because it's just 6.16 kilowatt hour, so it's pretty tiny. But they do claim that the bike gets around 112 miles, 180 kilometers on the new European driving test cycle, which probably represents a realistic urban range. I expect about half that, I would think, at speed. Charging from a wall socket takes 6 hours, 0 to flat. 0 to full, I think that must be. I've just misprinted something there. But generally speaking, most people will be charging to about 80% capacity, which should be quicker than that. Wheels are 17-inch, 180 at the front, 120/80 at the rear. They're hung on upside down forks, as you can see at the front, and then a preload adjustable monoshock at the rear. So nothing particularly exciting about the suspension. But you do get combined brakes and dual channel ABS, which comes from Bosch. That's a step up from most bikes in that kind of category, to get both of those linked and ABS. You also get a motorized reverse function should you need it, and the belt drives the rear wheels. The seat height is a tad under 31 inches, so should be reasonably accessible to most riders. But as in common with a lot of these bikes, it is a little bit weighty, 198 kilos or 436.5 pounds. The boxes and the bars are standard fitment though, and they add another 14.5 kilograms to the bike's all up weight. There is incidentally a storage area in the tank, which you can pop things in, and you do get a USB charger with it. The cost cutter, it does seem to have a plain halogen headlight, which is a little bit of a surprise. You do get LED position lights though, and turn signals, and the LCD dash incident, interestingly, actually has a old-fashioned needle on a dial, which be honest, I prefer on some bikes where the small size of the digits can make it very difficult to read what your speedo is telling you. 3 colors is a candy blue metallic, the candy red metallic, and a charcoal grey metallic. I'm not really convinced about grey motorcycles, I have to be. Although the included luggage sweetens the deal, the bike is still a bit pricey compared with the petrol powered alternatives. Over in the States it's $8,495 plus around $400 for pre-delivery charges, and you need to add shipping if you live outside California. But overall, I would say that's quite a neat looking little bike. Be interested to see how it does longer term. Right, okay, so don't forget, if you do enjoy the show, you can pop over to my coffee page, Survival Skills over there, and you can support me. And if you want to do so, you open up access to hundreds of better biking articles over there. Stuff that I've written between 2014 and 2022. So we're into our 9th year of items over there. There's 100 each year, and most of those are now up live on that site. Some of them are free to read, and the access to the rest, well, £3, cup of coffee basically gives you a month's access to the rest. So do pop over there and have a look, see what's on offer if you get a moment. Right, now into the final discussion point of the day. My buddy Malk, who is a former trainer himself, now a boffin at the Transport Research Laboratory, he pointed me at an article on the Bloomberg.com website entitled Helsinki, Finland's Amazing Traffic Safety Record Explained. Now, naturally, I had to take a look at that to see what it was all about. And the article starts by explaining that the city went a very different way from most urban areas, when in the late 1960s that the city actually rejected a plan which would have scrapped the existing streetcar system and raised a lot of the suburbs to create a network of high-speed motorways to access the city centre. And that's, if you think about it, is a sort of planning that the UK had followed a decade or so earlier. If you go and look at some of the maps of the motorways that come into London and the historical data, you'll see that there was in fact a whole series of ring roads that were planned with radial routes coming in to connect those ring roads. And the plan was started. It was never entirely finished, as you would know if you've headed to the South Circular Road, and you'll see what a mess that is. And you'll also know, of course, that there are certain motorways that come part way into London. The M23 is a really good example, and just suddenly stop in the middle of Croydon. That was the route that many US cities took, many UK cities took, but Finland and Helsinki actually rejected that. And what they did instead was they invested in public transport. They kept the streetcars, but they also built a subway. They also focused very early on slowing traffic down by reducing speed limits. But something else they did was they narrowed urban lanes. So rather than limiting car use, which is the what Oslo's done by putting in car-free zones and restricting car parking, something that Hackney are trying to do at the moment, if you remember, or building designated cycle tracks, which is the approach followed in the Netherlands. Sort of Amsterdam is a very good example of this. So a very different approach to actually mix pedestrians, cyclists and vehicles, but to slow everything down. And it seems to have worked, because cycling and walking deaths actually fell significantly, 75% between 2005 and 2020. Now, they also use speed cameras to enforce the limits up to 20 kph over the limit. The fine is €200, which is big enough, but exceed it by more than 20 kph, and the fines now scale with income. And in 2002, a Nokia executive who was actually speeding on his motorcycle, he was 25k over the limit, he actually got €116,000 fine, which is basically 2 weeks' income. So the package works. Helsinki has made international news because it went an entire year, 2019 I think it was, without a single pedestrian or cyclist fatality. Now, the article goes on to state that only 219 people died on Finnish roads in 2021, or 4 per 1,000 residents. And the writer, who's US-based, said that it was around 1/3 of the US rate. So how well do we do here? Well, actually, we do a bit better. Our rate overall is 3 per 100,000. And that's in a much more densely populated country. Now, you might argue we don't get quite the winter weather that they do in Finland, but we certainly don't, escape scot-free with perfect driving conditions all year round. And we do have a lot of very busy urban conglomerations. Finland has many more very much smaller towns. Helsinki is only just over 1 million, I think, in terms of population. So we have a lot more urban areas with big conglomerations than they do in Finland. So I don't think we do too bad. We do actually knock ourselves for our safety rate at times, but I don't think we should. But anyway, moving on, the section that really caught my eye was entitled "Question Every Crash." And the article went on to explain that Finland invests significant resources into understanding why collisions actually happen, and that unlike the US, the writer wrote, these investigations aren't predicated on an assumption that blame lies with the person behind the wheel. And of course, that is pretty much how we see motorcycle, car, van, lorry, truck, bus, whatever accidents here. We look to see who caused the crash and what they did wrong rather than anything else. Now, just look at crash stats for a moment. Now, according to data from 2020, which comes from the DFT, 38% of all road accidents in Great Britain were caused by the driver or rider not looking properly. That's the official description. Failure to judge other person's path or speed and careless driving, that accounted for 20%. And the third one was careless, reckless, or in a hurry, and that was 18% of all collisions. Now, interestingly, speeding was only equal 8th on the list, just 6% of the main causes of a crash. and that was actually level with travelling too fast for the conditions. Now, the question I would always ask, of course, is what caused the cause? If we know that the vehicle was, say, travelling too fast for conditions, what does that actually mean? Now, the Finns, they go to great lengths to try to uncover the root causes of these serious crashes, because basically that's the way we're going to understand them, and by understanding them we can use that information to produce strategies to prevent recurrences of the same crash. Now, for the last 50 years in Finland, all fatal crashes and some non-fatal ones have triggered the formation of a multidisciplinary assessment panel. And this is apparently comprised of experts from a number of different fields, including traffic planning, human behavior, healthcare, as well as law enforcement. And following each investigation, the panel will release a public report with recommendations. Now, funded through revenue, it's collected from auto insurance premiums. Helsinki officials say that their findings regularly lead to policy changes, which include such things as adjusting road geometry and changing traffic lights. Now, if this process actually sounds rather familiar, it might be because it really resembles the comprehensive investigations initiated by the US National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB, which follow something like a plane crash. But as the article says, the NTSB in the US rarely conduct probes into roadway collisions. Instead, typically those incidents are left to be investigated by local law enforcement, which don't dig nearly so deeply in it. And the article says they often focus on the individuals involved in the crash, paying scant attention to contributing factors like road and vehicle design. So if that sounds familiar, it should do too, because it's pretty much the system we have here. We let the police investigate it, they write their report. You never see a public report produced from an accident. I don't know where they go. The inquest will get one, or they'll get a statement anyway from the police where they put their point of view after the crash. But what the report goes into, I have absolutely no idea. Now, I've said many times over the last 20 plus years I've been working as a motorcycle trainer that no one intends to make a mistake when they ride or drive. However crazy you look at somebody's behavior post hoc, at the time when the driver or rider was doing whatever they were doing, they thought they were in control of the situation. But the fact is that the off-the-wall crashes, where everybody says somebody was doing something completely bonkers, are relatively rare. The vast majority of crashes are actually composed of drivers and riders who are actually behaving in a sort of a sensible and legal manner. So rather than saying, for example, didn't look properly, why aren't we investigating what the rider actually did, what the driver thought they'd done, why they thought they had observed and had all the information they needed, and why it is that they actually missed something which contributed to a crash. That way we would know what didn't look properly actually means, but simply saying didn't look properly tells us nothing. Similarly, too fast for the conditions. It's another meaningless conclusion. Think about it, because the driver or the rider arrived at the point at which they crashed. So the speed that they were using must have been okay just moments earlier, meters earlier, to have got to the point where suddenly their speed wasn't right. But what changed? Something must have changed. Maybe the rider or driver didn't leave much of a margin to cope with a sudden change of situation. But the question that we have to ask ourselves is what changed, not why they were going too fast, because clearly they didn't crash 5 minutes earlier. And the article actually concluded with another interesting observation. We've been hearing a lot about V2X, which stands for Vehicle to Everything. And this is all about the technology which will allow cars to communicate with one another, and also with infrastructure at the side of the road. And that all comes with the goal, of course, of avoiding collisions, because we're told that the technology will be safer than drivers, and the ultimate would be autonomous vehicles controlling themselves as they go along in the traffic flow, all without humans behind the wheel. And the goal for all this is that it's said to be safer. So the author actually asked what role information technology had actually played in Helsinki's success in reducing crashes in recent years? And the answer was surprising, because it was zero. We simply slowed down the cars. So there we are. I'll leave you with that thought. Quite an interesting one, I think. I've just realised I've left the picture of the motorcycle up all the way through the show. Never mind. Thank you for tuning in today. I hope I've given you some interesting material today. Many apologies once again about the glitches which prevented this show going out live. Hopefully, next time round will be all functioning properly again. But if you are out there on your bike today, remember to keep it shiny side up, and hopefully see you again for the next show, which will be Wednesday. And don't forget the live Science of Being Seen presentation on Wednesday evening too. So once again, it's Kevin Williams of Survival Skills, thanking you for tuning in to Elevenses.